In the late 70s, they were the quintessential poster couple of the punk rock movement. Sid and Nancy, a combustible combination that would end in tragedy. Nancy Spungen murdered in a seedy hotel room. Her boyfriend, Sid Vicious, charged with her murder, and then overdosed before the trial.
Well, the big myth about Sid and Nancy, of course, is that they had a suicide pact.
More than 2 decades later, this central question remains. Did Sid kill Nancy and then kill himself? But this sordid tale of sex, drugs, and punk rock is scattered with other mysteries and myths. Stories that run the gamut from drug overdoses to mental institutions to an even stranger urban legend that followed Sid's death. The legend of Sid and Nancy continues to be one of rock and roll's greatest unsolved mysteries. Sid and Nancy were 2 of the most controversial figures that emerged from the punk rock scene. Sid Vicious was a self-loathing punk rocker from the Sex Pistols. Nancy Spungen, a New York runaway, prostitute, and devoted groupie. Legs McNeil, co-founder of Punk magazine, remembers them as 2 extremely damaged human beings who were made for each other.
Nancy was a self-professed groupie on the New York punk scene who was desperate to find herself a rock and roll boyfriend. And when she didn't get one in New York, she went to London and she hooked up with Sid Vicious.
According to Eileen Polk, a photographer on the music scene who befriended her, Nancy had the perfect calling card to get in with the band: drugs.
She made no effort to hide this. She also made no effort to hide the fact that she had earned the money to buy the drugs through prostitution.
When Nancy brought her punk rock trophy home to New York, she gloated about her conquest.
She had finally made it. She came back from London with a rock star, and a famous rock star.
I think they were in love, you know. I think they really were in love with each other. But they became the famous couple, Sid and Nancy.
Sid and Nancy's relationship was bound by drugs, and Sid's usage started to take its toll on the Sex Pistols. Eventually, Nancy was forbidden to tour with the group, driving a wedge between Sid and the band's frontman, Johnny Rotten. It was a situation that would lead to the group's ultimate demise in January 1978. In the aftermath, Sid became despondent.
When the Sex Pistols broke up in San Francisco, after their last show at the Winterland Garden, Sid consequently flew back to New York and overdosed on the airplane and was admitted into the hospital.
It was just the first in a series of drug overdoses. Sid eventually recovered and was released from the hospital, but Sid and Nancy's drug habit had spiraled out of control, and in order to feed their habit, Sid played high-paying gigs at the punk rock club Max's Kansas City.
And Sid was extremely high. Consequently, the shows were really horrible. You could see Sid standing up there, well, actually kind of teetering up there because he was always nodding out. It was really, really sad. It was really tragic.
By the middle of 1978, Sid and Nancy spent most of their time in a drugged-out haze in room 100 at the Chelsea Hotel. They even developed a penchant for playing with knives in bizarre bloodletting games. But those games may have turned deadly. For on October 11th, 1978, the couple's warped fairy tale romance would end in tragedy. Nancy Spungen was found dead in their hotel bathroom at the age of 20.
Nancy died from a knife wound to the lower abdomen. It was apparently about 1 inch wide, and she bled to death. And there was a trail of blood leading from the bed where she was sleeping or lying with Sid to the bathroom, and she was found dead on the bathroom floor.
According to Sid, he had passed out cold from an overdose of downers called Tuinals, only to wake up to find Nancy face down in a pool of blood. Sid claimed to have no recollection of how she got there, but police weren't so convinced. With Sid as the only witness, the myths surrounding the murder of Nancy Spungen were born. Did Sid kill his beloved girlfriend in a drug-induced rage? Did Nancy die accidentally in some twisted, dangerous game? Or was there some other explanation?
The people who I know who talked to Sid and asked him what had happened said that Sid really couldn't remember killing her. I think he would have. You know, even if you're in a blackout, I think he'd remember stabbing your girlfriend in the stomach.
But with no witnesses to back up Sid's recollection, the rumors began to swirl. The main one centering on a drug deal gone awry.
I heard that the night Nancy died, she was making phone calls to try and get drugs delivered. I also heard that she was claiming to have lots of money and offering anyone who would deliver drugs a lot of money. And this is what makes me very suspect of the theory that Sid killed her, because there was no money found in the apartment the night that she died.
And Eileen theorizes if Nancy did have large sums of money in their apartment, she wouldn't have shied away from a threatening situation.
I think that if someone showed up that night at the Chelsea and tried to rob or threaten Nancy, that she was the type of person that would have fought them. Nancy was not afraid of anybody.
But police already had their suspect. On October 12, 1978, Sid Vicious was arrested for the murder of Nancy Spungen. He was booked into Rikers Island and was later released on $50,000 bail. His trial was set for a later date. Accused of murder and his girlfriend gone forever, Sid became distraught again. An attempted suicide took him from the jail cell to a padded cell, Bellevue Mental Hospital. Sid survived his second overdose, but as soon as he was released, he found himself back in Rikers after a bar fight. But Sid would get one last chance. Released from prison, he was finally determined to get his life back on track.
When we picked Sid up at the courthouse, he looked really good. You know, he looked very healthy. He really looked a lot better than he had at the time when he was performing at Max's.
While the murder charge still hung over the fallen punk star's head, Sid tried to put his life back together. He started by settling in with a new girlfriend named Michelle Robinson. On the night of his release, Michelle, Eileen, and Sid's mother, Ann Beverly, planned to celebrate with a dinner in Sid's honor. The relaxing dinner ended when a knock at the door brought drugs crashing back into the life of Sid Vicious.
I could tell as soon as these people arrived that drugs had arrived, because all of a sudden people were going into the bathroom, looking around in bags and drawers for stuff. What had been kind of a calm, relaxing end of a dinner turned into something different, and it became unpleasant. All of a sudden I see this kind of shadowy figure stumbling in the hallway, and I went down the hallway and into the bedroom, and I saw that Sid had collapsed on the bed. And so I knew that he'd taken some drugs and he'd overdosed. They took blankets and wrapped him up and started rubbing his shoulders and shaking him and going, "Sid, Sid, you know, wake up." And all of a sudden he came out of it. And the first thing he said was, "Oh, I'm sorry I scared you all."
Eileen wanted to take Sid to the nearest hospital, but his mother refused, fearing the media circus would land her son right back in jail. So Sid was allowed to drift back asleep. The next morning, February 2nd, 1979, the infamous legend of punk rock was pronounced dead of a heroin overdose, found in his new girlfriend's bed while she lay sleeping right beside him. Sid Vicious would never be tried for Nancy Spungen's murder.
I think the police believed that Sid killed Nancy, but I think that they were looking into other possibilities. The thing that bothers me is that they didn't follow up on those other possibilities. I think that if Sid had lived, they would have had to.
The mystery of Nancy's death would forever remain unsolved, the answers perhaps lost along with her boyfriend's own tragic fate. But beyond these nagging questions surrounding Nancy's mysterious death, there lurks another legend, this one a tale about Sid's missing ashes.
The myth of Sid's ashes, the story was, and I think it was reported in the press this way, that Ann Beverly, Sid's mom, had the ashes in her hand and was running to catch an airplane and spilled them on the runway, and, you know, all the ashes blew away from the jet engine. I remember reading it.
The story has been circulating since the week of Sid's death, but Nancy's friend Eileen Polk insists it's patently untrue.
I would really like to find out who made up that story about Sid's ashes being dropped at the airport and swept up by janitors. because that person's a liar.
And Eileen says the truth is this. After Sid's death, Anne Beverly wanted to fulfill her son's wish to lay his ashes next to Nancy. But Nancy's mother wanted her daughter nowhere near her rebel boyfriend, even in death.
She called up Nancy's mother, and she said, "Can we please bury Sid next to Nancy?" And Mrs. Spungen said, "I'm sorry, but it's a Jewish cemetery." It was kind of an excuse. It was just a way of saying, no, we can't have him buried next to her because my family thinks he killed her.
But Mrs. Spungen did tell Anne where Nancy was buried, and Anne and Eileen paid their last respects.
Later on that night, we drove Anne to the cemetery, and it was snowing hard by that time, and she got out of the van and ran off in the snow and climbed over the cemetery wall and scattered Sid's ashes on Nancy's grave.
The punk fairy tale ended on a bittersweet note. Sid and Nancy were together for eternity, but their deaths marked the end of an era, and what was dubbed the punk rock explosion had fizzled forever.